The Latter-day Lives podcast is not owned or operated by The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Any opinions expressed or implied in this recording are solely those of the host and guests and not of any specific organization unless otherwise stated. Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 176 of the Latter-day Lives podcast. I'm your host, Sean Rapier. Thank you so much for checking in with us again this week. We really appreciate it. We've got such a fantastic show for you. But first of all, a couple of housekeeping items. If you think you would be an amazing guest on Latter-day Lives, if you've got an interesting life story, you've had great experiences, you want to talk about faith, please reach out to guest@latterdaylives.com. That's guest@latterdaylives.com. And that will go through to Gene Chittister, who is the producer of the show. And it's working really well working with him. It's really been great. So please reach out. Or if you know someone who would make a fantastic guest, please send those emails to guest@latterdaylives.com. Also, if you have something you want to share on our social media that you think would be worthwhile or uplifting, we would love to share that for you with our social media following. We do have a new social media manager. I was actually going to play his introduction last week, but I ended up having some technical difficulties. And so this week we're going to play a little intro episode so you can get to know Skylar Fleming, who's such an amazing guy. And you can send that to social@latterdaylives.com. social@latterdaylives.com. So anyway, those are the places to send all of that. And then one other thing, we do want to thank new reviewers on Apple Podcasts. And we did break through the 500 review mark. We're now up to 503 ratings and reviews. So thank you so much. We have a 4.7 average out of 5 stars. We really are grateful for that. 2 new reviewers this week, Mahota Rose and Mama T254. Thank you both so much for your 5-star reviews and your kind words. It means the world to us. Okay, on to this week's episode. My guest this week, Kelly Loosely, such an amazing guy. He's the easiest guy to talk to. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Kelly and I are similar in age and in a lot of things that we like, and I so enjoyed talking to him. And he has had such an amazing life. You are going to love this conversation. And coming up this week in my Latter-day Life, a brotherhood in Arkansas. It's all coming up. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's conversation. And today, right here in the Latter-day Live studio, my guest is a filmmaker. He is also an instructor at BYU and has had so many cool experiences and came highly recommended by Ken Craig, who we trust so much. Kelly Loosely, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Super excited to have you here. I've got so many questions. We sat down before we started recording and found out that we know like so many people in common.
That's right.
I'm impressed you haven't been on the show before.
They don't like me, that's why.
No, Ken, I asked Ken, I said, yeah, if you ever know guests, and he immediately said, you got to have Kelly on. Kelly's amazing. So we'll get into how you know Ken and Lincoln and so many of our other friends. But first of all, let's get to know you. Tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up.
Okay, so I'm a Utah kid. I grew up out in West Jordan, Utah. Whole life there. Went on my mission to Portugal. Came back. Went to BYU, majored in film.
You've got the classic Latter-day Saints story.
I have the classic story.
Let's go back to when you were younger. Okay. Were you raised in the church?
Raised in the church. Actually, both sides of my family were heavily active. I'm from one of those families where my parents only had to try to have family home evening twice a month because once a month we'd meet with my dad's side of the family. Once a month we'd meet with my mother's side of the family. So LDS through and through.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So grew up out there. And in fact, at one point... my grandfather was a stake president for like 17 years, and he was the stake president when the stake was all of West Jordan, South Jordan, Riverton.
Oh my gosh!
Everything basically from 60th South to the prison, and everything west of the freeway was the stake. So
wait, 17 years.
Yeah. It was a different era back then, right? Things were
But
different.
can you imagine serving for 17 years?
No.
Me neither.
So yeah, so grew up out there.
What were you into when you were growing up?
So my family's a big sporto family. My dad played college football. My mom was a PE teacher.
Wow.
Big time sportos. But me and my siblings really liked the arts. My parents loved movies. We'd go to a movie a week sort of a thing.
Nice.
And although my parents were really into sports, they would encourage anything we wanted to pursue. They'd take us. So and my mom was big on going to the library. We'd go once a week to the library, get our books, and learn and figure out whatever we wanted to do. So I started doing animation. I think my 6th grade year, I made my first animated film with my best friend. And then I just got obsessed with it and just started doing that. And when I was about 14, a guy that everybody knows now is Richard Paul Evans.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. He's Rick Evans to me. He discovered me. I was having my films transferred to video at the same place he was having some animation tests transferred. And got my information and then convinced my parents to let him check me out of school. And all through my high school years, I would do clay animation commercials with him.
What?
So that's basically mostly the job I had through high school was just building sets and doing clay animation.
So were you just artistic, like just in drawing, or you're doing this claymation?
No, so I should back up. Like when I was, I'm a 70s kid. So
yeah, you
I
and
was
me
born.
both.
I was born in 71. And so back then, Disney movies would only come out every 7 years,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And nobody back then, no adult in the right mind would go to a Disney film by themselves. Things are different now. But so I was the right age when Bambi came out, and everybody, my aunts and uncles, people just kept taking me to Bambi, and my dad told me how it worked. And so from about the age of 4 or 5, I was obsessed. So I drew all the time, and that was my thing.
Did you have to learn to draw, or did it come naturally to you?
I have no memory. I just remember drawing.
Yeah, I tried to learn. I wanted to draw. I'm a big Disney fan, and I can't draw to save my life.
I think I don't know if I was good initially, right? But I don't think anybody said otherwise, so I just kept going. And I'm a big Disney fan, so that's all I was doing was Disney. Trying to emulate the Disney animation stuff that I saw.
That is so cool, and we grew up in the same area. I was born in '72, so that's the sweet spot.
There you go.
So this relationship with Richard Paul Evans, that's a big deal.
Yeah, he was great. In fact, he was paying me really decent wages on a per hour basis. Quite often, I was making more than my dad would make. And I wasn't old enough to drive when he started hiring me, so he'd drive out to my parents' house, pick me up. And their parents would just be like, when will we see him? And like, he's just like, well, he'll call you periodically. And we would just crank out R.C. Willey commercials and some commercials for Japan. And that was the bulk of, I think I made 18 commercials for him over the course of that time. It was great.
Do you look back at that and just pinch yourself? Like, I cannot believe as a kid I got to do that stuff.
Yeah, no. A very charmed life in many ways.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
So you get up through high school, you're doing all this animation, you're falling in love with film. Mm-hmm. Did you know that you wanted that for a career at that time?
Oh, I knew from the time I was 4 or 5 years old. I'd read all the books. I'd read everything about Steven Spielberg that I could read. I'd read everything about Walt. It was my thing. So yeah, I definitely knew that's where I was going. I had there a lot of times kids would, sort of switch up, and there were times where I had little passions about this or that, but those never lasted. Film was the thing I kept coming back to.
It was always there.
Yep, absolutely.
And I need to remind, because we have a lot of younger listeners, that this was not in the age of pick up your iPhone and digitally edit it.
No, and my parents weren't very wealthy, so when I wanted to make my own movies, I would have to go get mow lawns or do some sort of manual labor to earn enough money to buy Super 8 cartridges for our family's Super 8 camera. I would set up a little set in my bedroom and frame by frame painstakingly make these really horrible stop motion things. And it was that work that Richard saw. It was like, well, nobody else is doing this. Might as well hire this kid. He's not afraid to try stuff.
And then you're doing linear editing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Shot it as it was supposed to be seen.
That is amazing. So this takes you up to your mission.
Yeah.
Tell us where you went on your mission.
Well, so I should back up because I got scholarship to BYU and to the University of Utah for film because of all the commercial work. I decided I was going to go to the U, which I should have never believed that that's what I was going to do, because if you look back through my elementary school pictures, I always have a BYU football jersey on. But I was supposed to go to the U, and about a month or two before school was to start, they had a bunch of film equipment stolen. And I thought, well, that's the only reason I'm going to school. So by default, I ended up at BYU. Went down and worked at BYU, and at that time, they had a lot of us going out and working at the motion picture studio. So I worked on a number of projects, and I have to say, all my life, I didn't want to serve a mission.
Yeah?
I told my parents, since my name was Kelly and it was a girl's name, I wanted to go on a girl's mission because it was shorter. And I didn't really know, but I worked on a church film called Easter Dream.
Okay.
And when Jesus is walking, I helped build Jerusalem. I helped build the cross that Jesus is carrying. And when Jesus, the actor, started walking down the thing, I saw him and thought, Spirit hit me. And I was like, yeah, I got to serve a mission. So submitted my papers. And just like Ken, my first mission call was to the Spain Las Palmas mission, but speaking Portuguese. And it took a while to figure out where that was. That was the Canary Islands. And then literally the week next, I got another letter saying you're now going to the Portugal-Lisbon mission.
Awesome.
Those Portuguese-speaking islands have been switched. And then a week later, I got a letter saying the mission has been divided. You're now going to the Portugal-Lisbon North mission. And then I think Ken had the same experience, but I didn't get my visa. So then I went to the Washington, D.C. South mission for a while. Yeah. So that was my story. And then ended up in Portugal and actually ended up on my very first area was one of those islands that kept getting moved around.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So we mentioned Ken a few times. We're talking about Ken Craig, my co-host on Sharing Time, as well as you can always go back and find the Ken and Katie Craig episode of this podcast. But you not only served with Ken, you also served with
Lincoln Hoppe.
Lincoln Hoppe, whose film Witnesses is all over the place right now.
Yeah, no, so it was Elder Craig and Elder Hoppe when we all got back to BYU. I didn't know their names, right?
Yeah.
And they were part of the early improv, the Garens group there,
which was
at BYU.
a big part of my life, sure.
And that was the exact same time I was there. So, so I know those guys. We run into each other all the time in the Harris Fine Arts Center. And
if you went to Garen's shows, you and I may have met, actually. Years ago, I got to hang out with those talented guys.
That's funny.
So how was your mission?
Mission was spectacular. Yeah, really great experience. The exact kind of butt kick I needed to help me sort of really understand what my family had sacrificed for.
Yeah.
It was a great mission. Love it. In fact, I've been back multiple times to Portugal because I'm slightly obsessed with the place and the people.
It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So you come home from your mission. What came next?
So for me, I had gone a year, this was back when we went on missions at 19, so I'd gone a year to BYU. When I came back, I couldn't afford to go to BYU full time, so I moved furniture for a living to pay for school, and I went to the BYU Salt Lake Center.
Nice.
And I kicked my parents out of their garage, and I built a 4-foot by 8-foot set, and I started to make a clay animated film. And BYU didn't have the equipment I needed, so I borrowed the equipment from Richard Paul Evans.
Oh, my gosh.
And I made a clay animated film called Nocturnal that ended up winning a student Emmy, and I believe it's the first student Emmy, at least for animation, that BYU had won. So I did that, and in fact, I never moved back down to Provo. For the rest of my time in school, I lived at my parents' house in West Jordan, and I commuted back and forth to Provo for the next 3 years, and just... gripped on people's projects and helped with other things while I was making my own stuff. And I was kind of like the silly animation guy in amongst the animation, in amongst the film students there in the film program.
That is just awesome. Did you ever think about stepping outside of animation, or was it animation first and then film?
No, so actually most of the things I did in school were always a mixture of animation and live action. I loved all of it. To me, I loved all of it, but animation was an interesting place I could compete, and my films would be unique and different than other people's work. So I played sort of on both sides of it.
Very cool.
But yeah.
So you end up graduating from BYU? Yeah.
So I should probably back up. I met my wife the year before I was going to graduate. We dated, got engaged. While we were dating, I won my student Emmy, and I could take one guest. So my girlfriend, which is my wife, came with me to the student Emmys. That convinced her that maybe I was going to be able to make a living at this, right? We got married in March of 1996, graduated from school in April of 96, and then we moved to L.A. just blind in June of that year. We didn't know anybody. We had a weird 3-month house sitting arrangement we took advantage of, and we just moved down there and
was the idea just that's where the industry is? Hollywood's there, work has to be there?
Yeah, that's where the work would be.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That would make sense.
Yep.
You're not the first person to sit in that chair who made that leap.
Right.
Who decided, hey, I'm going to make the jump, just go to L.A. So talk about those first few months in LA.
Yeah, so that was weird. The church became your network really quickly, right? But it wasn't. I didn't find that members of the church were necessarily super helpful in terms of getting jobs. They were good at referencing people and that sort of thing. But it was still the early days. There were a handful of LDS people who were really successful, like Gerald Mullen, and Brigham Taylor was slowly on his way up. And a handful of, and you're right, there were a handful of us that just moved down. So I knew other people had moved down at the same time. But I couldn't get a job to save my life. I was working for a temp agency. My wife got a teaching job immediately. They needed teachers, so she got a teaching job.
Did you expect it was going to be difficult? Or did you think, I'm going to get there and start working in the field?
I thought it would be difficult. I didn't think it was going to be as difficult because other friends or other people I had known had internships and things started to work out. And I was literally temping for like 7 months and couldn't figure out what was going on. I'd had great interviews. Nothing was going well. And so I called the BYU professor and I said, hey, something's wrong. Every job I've ever interviewed for, I got. And here in LA, this isn't working out for me. And he connected me with a guy at HBO, and the guy said, hey, well, let's go to lunch. We met for lunch. He says, you seem great. I'm not sure why you're not getting jobs. When you get home, this is a different era, right? When you get home, will you fax me your resume? And I said, yeah, I'll fax you my resume. So I got home, faxed my resume, and it was almost like the fax barely went through, and he called me and said, I can see your problem. You have way too much experience. People either are going to think that you think you know everything or that you're going to be difficult, like you're some sort of prima donna. He just said, take all of your work and say that you were just a production assistant and take your student Emmy off of your resume, send it back out to everybody. And I said, well, won't they compare it to the old resume? He goes, no, nobody's going to take that much time. And I did that, and literally the next day I got a job, my intro job at DreamWorks as a production assistant.
You have got to be kidding.
Isn't
that amazing?
After 7 months, and even Gerald Mullen, like, referring me to people. Yeah, that's how I got my job, is by dumbing down my resume.
So how exciting was it to get an offer from DreamWorks?
Well, it was spectacular, and especially in light of being LDS, they were making Prince of Egypt. This was at the very beginning.
Oh, yeah.
This was when it was called DreamWorks SKG.
Yeah, sure.
And it was a multifaceted, huge company. They had a TV division. They had a music department. I mean, we were on the corner of the Universal Studios lot. We could drive over to the Amblin lot. We would see Steven Spielberg. You would see celebrities. I was working with people who I recognized their names because they were former Disney animators, right? And we were working on a religious title, and they were finishing up the prologue of the film, and it if you've ever seen the film, the very beginning
so many times
blows my mind. It's so good. So yeah, I was in seventh heaven.
Prince of Egypt has, to me, and I'm not an expert in animation, but one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, there's a scene with a wave when the water is parted, and there's a whale that goes by the edge of the wave, and it gives me chills every time. I think that's the most beautiful animation.
Yeah, no, it's gorgeous.
So was that the first project you worked on?
So I was actually hired on by the company, but I wasn't on the film specifically. And in fact, by eventually, I mean within a month or two, people are like, oh, he's the married Mormon kid. They made me shuttle around religious leaders that had come to... DreamWorks was really nervous about what they were doing, so they brought almost every religion under the sun to come and see what they were doing because they wanted a really great grassroots word-of-mouth campaign.
Right.
And because I was the safe Mormon kid, I hosted a lot of those people. What they didn't realize was a lot of those people didn't like Mormon kids.
If they had understood faith a little better.
but that was my job. I became the expert at, depending on what time of day, I could drive from DreamWorks to LAX airport and shuttle people back and forth and make sure they got back to meet with Jeffrey Katzenberg on time. And
what
it was a great
cool
experience. Yeah, it was really
Did you ever
great.
get to meet Jeffrey Katzenberg?
All the time.
He is a fascinating man.
Yeah.
I mean, a brilliant, fascinating man.
Yeah, it was interesting because my brother-in-law had been a junior exec at Disney and had worked with him when he was at Disney, and my brother-in-law didn't like him. Yeah. And part of that was that he wasn't working for himself, and he was kind of having some hard occupational situations, we later found out there. But literally, I was a production assistant making less money as a college graduate at DreamWorks than I made as a 14-year-old doing animation with Richard Paul Evans, and he knew my name. And he was gracious and kind to me. Here's my best story in this regard, because you were saying, think about these stories. As the host of the, I picked up a Jewish rabbi one time, and he was mostly mad I wouldn't let him smoke in my car. But when he found out I was LDS, he got really upset about the fact that we had done temple work for for Holocaust victims. And I said, yeah, we apologize for that, and we're working those things out. And he said, yeah, you have. And he was gracious. But I realized I started getting cautious about, because they would always ask me where I was from, and as soon as they found out I was from Salt Lake, clearly LDS. Well, I pick up Jerry Falwell, right?
Oh my gosh, you picked up Jerry Falwell.
Yeah. So, and this was right after The People versus Larry Flynt, which the movie is about Larry Flynt being sued by Jerry Falwell for defamation.
Yes.
So I pick up Jerry Falwell and his son Mike. Mike is a redhead. I'm a redhead. I start talking about how I was making this documentary on redheads. We got laughing about it. They asked me where I was from. We got into the whole LDS conversation. And he said, yeah, we had a Baptist convention in Salt Lake. We chose Salt Lake because you guys have such a strong position on the family. And he said, we came out there and I met with Ezra Taft Benson. And I said, oh, yeah. He was, we talked about how he had been the Secretary of Agriculture. We had that whole conversation. And I said, he was a great prophet. And he goes, he wasn't the prophet. He was the president of your church. And I said, well, I beg to differ. I think he's the prophet. And he just kind of got quiet. And then that was the end of the drive, and I dropped him off at the Amblin building to meet with Jeffrey Katzenberg. And I was like, oh, why did I get, uppity right there? Or why did I decide to sort of bear my testimony right in that moment? Because I didn't necessarily, me personally, to be honest, I didn't have very high regard for Jerry Falwell. He was one of those TV preachers, right?
Right.
I went back to my office, and there was a pink slip on my desk. And I thought, oh, I've been canned. After all this time to get my job, I've been canned. Well, it wasn't a formal pink slip. It's some secretary was using pink note cards. And it said, by the way, you've been given the rest of the day off. Jerry Falwell wants you to host him while he's in Los Angeles. He loves you, right? And I went to pick him up at Katzenberg's office, and he grabs me in a big bear hug and shoves me into Jeffrey and says, Jeffrey, have you met Kelly? He's one of your good Mormon workers here. And Jeffrey kind of just like with a wink and a nod, like, let's do this for him. Shook my hand. And literally, I just drove Jerry Falwell and his son the rest of the day. And this is the funny part. He said, hey, do you know where the Flint publication building is? And I said, yeah, I think so. I think it's on Wilshire because it's big.
It's a big building out there.
And he goes, yeah, I need you to take me there. And I was like, what? And he goes, we became friends over the course of The People versus Larry Flynt. And he goes, we're great friends. I'm going to go meet with him. So I drove them there, and then I sat in the parking garage in the basement of the Flint publication building.
My gosh.
While he went up and talked to Larry Flynt.
And I'm assuming we have a few listeners who don't know who Larry Flynt is. He was the publisher of Hustler magazine.
Yeah.
Who later got shot and all kinds of crazy things.
And I didn't realize he had a whole publishing empire. He's known for the pornography.
Yeah.
But he owned like PC Magazine and Fish and Stream. He had this huge publication. I didn't know any of that, right? But I just sat down in the parking garage because Jerry Falwell didn't want me to see offensive things. He didn't know what was going to be on the walls, right?
That is, you think back at that. You're sitting in the parking lot of Flint, the publisher of Hustler, while Jerry Falwell goes in to meet with... That is one of the most bizarre, awesome things I've ever heard.
It was so weird. And when he came back down, he said, guess who's a redhead? And I said, well, who's that? He goes, Larry Flynt's redhead. And I said, oh, I've approached famous redheads before. Nobody wants to be in my film. He goes, we'll make it happen. Sure enough, they made it happen. They got us to go interview Larry Flynt for this redheaded documentary.
Oh my gosh.
And what's even funnier about that is he would come back to LA periodically. He was on Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. And he called me up and said, I'm bringing my grandson. I don't know where to take him. Can you host us? So I would periodically go to dinner with Jerry Falwell. He was so gracious, and he loved the fact that I stood up for myself and that I believed what I believed. And it changed my whole opinion about who he was.
Every time I see a picture of Falwell now, I'm just going to think of, this is for our generation. Falwell, and he was part of PTL, and he's the one who took over for PTL when Jim and Tammy Faye had their big falling out, and
he ran Liberty University.
Sure.
Yep.
That is...
No, he was as gracious and kind as he could be and respected the fact that I believed what I believed and was cool about the fact that I stood up for myself.
Kelly, that is phenomenal. Great? I love that. All right, so how long were you at DreamWorks?
I was at DreamWorks, I believe, 2 years.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was in my ward. I was the young men's president, and DreamWorks had, because I was a return missionary, because I was good at managing people, they had streamlined me. They wanted me to sort of go the producer's track. Well, the producer's track is a ton of hours, and it doesn't pay very well until you become a producer. And I thought, boy, at some point I want to have kids, and I want this and that, and I don't want to be a producer. I want to be on the art, the creative side. So I went to them and said, I don't want this track. I want to do your artist training program. And they said, no, we don't want you to do that. And I said, well, then I probably need to turn in my 2 weeks. This isn't working out. And they said, wait a second, do the artist and training program. So I did the artist training program. I passed it. The trainee people said, Kelly's a good enough artist. Let's move him over onto the art side. And my bosses said, no, he's too valuable doing what he's doing, because I'd been there from the beginning of the company.
Wow.
And so I went to lunch with my first counselor in Young Men's, and he said, Kelly, you're being exploited. This is classic at corporations. Nothing. He said, the only way you're ever going to move up is to leave and then come back at a different level. So I did. I left DreamWorks, and I didn't have anywhere to go. I told them I was going to leave, and they said, well, don't leave yet. How much time can you give us? And I said, well, I don't know. What do you need? So instead of 2 weeks' notice, I gave them 2 months' notice. I trained 3 people to take my job, and then they hired me back every day until I got my replacement job. I was just a temp on the studio lot there until I got my replacement job, which I ended up at the live action division of Disney, because a friend of mine, his name's Aaron Merrill, he produced the Book of Mormon films for the church. He and I had become friends there at DreamWorks, and then he had gone to Disney, and he was leaving Disney, so I took his slot.
Oh, wow.
In the live action division of Disney there. So
was that a big leap of faith to tell them, hey, I got to go without anything solid?
Sort of. But, I grew up poor, so I was okay with being poor. And if I wasn't going to do what I had aspired to do in LA, I didn't want to be in LA. We loved it there.
Yeah.
But if I was just going to be doing whatever
just
job,
a job, yeah,
I might as well move back to Utah and be around our families.
Oh, that's so great. So talk about your time at Disney. We've already established I'm a huge Disney fan. I was just at Disneyland 2 weeks ago.
Cool.
Big time Disney fan. So talk about being in the live action.
So live
division.
action is called Buena Vista Motion Pictures, right?
Yep.
Everybody knows that the films are distributed by Buena Vista Distribution. Well, really, they have a production entity called Buena Vista Motion Pictures. They make the movies, and then they put Hollywood Pictures or Disney Pictures or Touchstone Pictures on the movie. But it's all coming out of the same office.
Yeah.
That was the department I worked in. We were in the Frank G. Wells building there on the corner of the lot.
Gosh. Frank Wells.
The year I was there, we made A Sixth Sense, Summer of Sam, Armageddon, 13th Warrior.
So this was in the Renaissance period of Disney live action?
They had a really good year.
Yeah.
I'll just say that. We had a really good year. Disney has so many employees that when they have a Christmas party, you usually can't take your significant other, your spouse, right? They had made so much money that year that my wife got to go to the Christmas party. So, which was at the House of Blues, which was awesome. So, so I worked there, and that was great. And while we were there, we started having family members die. We had a lot of family die. Well, that first year, we had 5 people die, one of whom was my father-in-law.
Oh, gosh.
And he had a business in Lehigh, and we were the family. We were the couple that didn't have kids, who also got along and really well with my mother-in-law. So we moved back to take care of my mother-in-law.
How was that? How was that transition?
So that was heartbreaking.
You ended up having to leave Disney.
Yeah.
Did Disney kind of feel like a dream job?
No, because I wasn't in Disney Animation, right? Disney Animation would have been really where I had aspired to be. But it was pretty great. And that's where I was interfacing a lot with people. I don't know if you know Josh Harmon or Brigham Taylor. Brigham Taylor is probably
I know who Brigham Taylor is.
Yeah. So Brigham Taylor is probably the prominent LDS Disney live action guy because he produced the live action Jungle Book.
Yep.
He did the live action.
Sure.
Those guys were the guys that came up with the idea, let's turn the amusement park rides into movies.
Yeah.
Which at first wasn't successful, right? They did the Haunted House.
Mansion,
They also did the Bears, the Country Bears
Country
film.
Bears,
Those things tanked, but when the Pirates films took off, Brigham, rose. But Brigham was really interesting because he was an in-house producer for them, but he was also in charge of the year they made John Carter of Mars and when they made The Lone Ranger.
Oh, no.
And after those failures, he thought, he's a really smart guy. He was like, I can see the writing on the wall. Someone's head's going to roll for these films. Yeah. So he went to them and said, you've always offered me a multi-picture option. Let me take that parachute. And the first film out of the gate with his option was that live-action Jungle Book, which was a home run.
Which was awesome.
Yep.
Which was amazing.
Yeah, and he's a great guy.
Love it.
Yeah, love him. He's actually got some family here. His daughter and his grandkids are here locally. Really good guy. So, it was during that
Great.
time that I sort of interfaced a little more with him. But yeah, being at Disney and thinking, okay, I'm going to finally get to sort of move into where I wanted to, and then family started dying. Yeah, it was a hard place to be.
Crazy. Oh, what a wild, wild ride. So you moved back to Lehigh?
So we moved back to Utah. We actually moved back to West Jordan, but I would go help my mother-in-law in Lehigh. I got just a local job working for a web company.
Yeah.
And then I would just go help my mother-in-law.
Did you think maybe your career was done then?
I thought it was over.
You thought that was it on film?
I thought I was toast.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to stay in media, but yeah, I thought that was over. And my wife was actually still in L.A. She had to finish the school year.
Oh, my gosh.
So I was here, and I would recruit my brothers or my friends to go help me do stuff with my mother-in-law at the business. And we slowly got it into shape, and we sold it off. And my wife eventually was finally finished school there and moved out here and joined us. But
did you guys have kids by this point?
Didn't have kids.
Not yet. Okay.
No. So yeah, we got established and helped out my mother-in-law, and she started to have health issues herself. And so we moved back here, and then I eventually got hired on by Feature Films for Families.
Oh, awesome.
Right?
Yeah.
And they were several years into a multi-million-dollar animated feature they were making in Budapest, Hungary. That the director he's a really great guy, LDS guy who lives in St. George. His name is Mark Swan. He had worked for Don Bluth for years.
Cool.
They brought me in basically just to be the heavy and try to get the film done. And so I worked with him until we finished that film.
What was that film?
Princess and the Pea. But we did that, and then we were doing some other projects for them. And it was during the course of working there that BYU came to me and said, "Hey, will you start the animation program with us?"
So BYU had no animation
program. A former faculty of mine, once I won the student Emmy, I had a faculty from the industrial design program come to me and say, "Hey, I'm teaching some 3D animation classes. Why don't you come take one of these classes?" And his name is Brent Adams. Okay. And Brent and I became really good friends. So the whole time I was in LA, Brent would bring people down from BYU to meet with me and say, "Hey, look, there's jobs here. This is this is a real industry." And we became really good friends. And he was the one that came and said, "I have a 1-year opportunity. Will you come teach with me at BYU?"
Incredible.
And
what year was that?
So that would have been 1999 is when he approached me. 2000 was when we started.
So this takes us back full circle to episode number 00001 of Latter-day Lives, the very first episode we ever did, where I got to hear this same story from Adam Sidwell, who started out, there was no animation program, and then suddenly they started one while he was there with you.
Yep.
And Adam learned from you.
So Adam would have been in the industrial design program. They had basically an animation track. And Adam was I was only like 2 or 3 years older than that group of students. And Adam was one of my first students.
Yeah. I texted Adam and told him you were coming in. And he said, "That is so awesome. You guys will have a blast."
So Adam's group was the first group that we really sort of shepherded through the process. And interestingly enough, they're still, as a group, one of the groups we're still closest to emotionally. Well, actually, 2 of those guys now are teachers at BYU. They're part of the faculty in the animation program. But we started that, and Feature Films for Family said, "We'd like you to stick around." And actually, the guy that was the head of the department was battling cancer at the time. So I kept working that job and working at BYU. And it was at that point my wife and I realized we're having some fertility issues. So it was during that time we had our first child. Went through all that couples who have fertility issues went through, right? But having 2 jobs allowed us to sort of pay those bills, because anybody who's been through those struggles knows it's expensive
stuff. Yeah.
But we got my oldest out of that, and as soon as we had my oldest, Feature Films came to me and said, "Okay, this guy doesn't have cancer anymore. Production's down," and they laid me off. And my boss, who I had sort of helped through his cancer struggle, he actually ended up dying from cancer. He came back, but he was just bawling, just sobbing, because he felt like he had betrayed me, and I was just like, "No, like." This totally helped me pay for my kid. This was awesome. The best blessing in the world. And the people I worked with there were lovely. I had nothing. I mean, every place I've ever worked had politics, so I didn't work, everybody always complained about the politics there. I was like, everywhere has politics. So
absolutely does.
So that's how we got my oldest. And my BYU gig was a full-time gig. And after that 1 year, they approved our program and said, "Okay, we want you to teach for us." So I was full-time.
So have you been there ever since?
Ever since. Just finished my 20th year at BYU.
That is so amazing. How many kids do you have now?
I have 2 kids.
2 kids. That's incredible in and of itself, too.
Yep.
How old are they?
So my oldest just turned 16 and my youngest is 13.
What an awesome time in life.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about inside the BYU animation program.
Yeah.
How much faculty is there within animation?
So now we have
program?
5. When we started off, there were 2 of us for a year, and then a third was added. And we did that until we sort of plunged that, kind of went that way for a number of years, and we were really successful. And other schools started to recruit us. And it was in light of other schools recruiting us, BYU was like, hey, wait a second, we probably ought to do something. And I probably should back up by telling you that my grandfather, who was the stake president for all those years out in West Jordan, he's also my patriarch.
Oh, wow.
And he was my sealer. He had been giving money to BYU for years, and when they asked us to start the animation program, the visual arts department didn't want to help contribute to it. So I went to my grandfather, and he gave me a portion of the money he was going to give to donate to BYU, and I went in 50-50 with his money with the visual arts program to start the animation program. That's how we started.
Kelly, that's amazing.
Isn't that
so
crazy?
You really built this program. I mean, you were there from go.
Well, Brent Adams, I'll give all the credit to Brent Adams, but I was lucky enough that I had this grandfather who was giving money to the church. And he gave us, I mean, it wasn't a lot. It was like 13 grand. And then the art department came in with 13 grand. But that's how we launched the one side of the program. And then we just started utilizing computer lab space on campus that wasn't being utilized. And that was the animation program. That's what Adam's experience was.
So can you major in animation now?
Yeah.
Can you get a degree in animation?
You get a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree through the design department, and it's in animation. We also have an animation emphasis in the computer science program. We teach those students as well. And then we also have illustration students who want to be concept designers, character designers, environment designers, and they participate with us as well.
That is just amazing. I'm so fascinated by all of this. How much production happens at BYU? Are you guys putting out student films? Are you doing work for the church? Or is it all purely instructional?
So we decided early on, sort of in collaboration actually with what BYU was saying, that we're going to be student focused. And so Adam had that experience. The very first group, we said, why don't you guys all go away, come back with a concept for a short film. They all pitched those concepts. They all voted. They chose one.
Is it something about birds?
No, it was lemmings.
Lemmings, yes.
It was about lemmings.
Yeah.
They chose one. They chose their student director and their producer. And then that group just killed themselves making that film. And we poured all of our time and energy and attention into that film.
How much has the technology changed in animation over the last 20 years?
Yeah, it's a whole different thing.
That must require a lot of learning on your part.
You know, it does, but you don't have to know everything. As a teacher, you know your section of it.
Yeah.
So here's what's interesting about the animation program. It's interdisciplinary. So the program, I ran the animation program every year. You're only supposed to run a program for 3 years and then you rotate. But I never got to rotate. So I ran it for 19 years, and then I just handed it off to another faculty last year. But I've been, other than the first 2 years I was in visual arts, they moved me over into the media arts program. So I'm actually film faculty. And I teach a screenwriting course for them, but then all the other classes I teach are really for the design department. But there are 2 faculty in the design department and then 2 faculty that are in computer science because animation uses those, those resources, that thinking, that ideology from all those different departments. And since I'm not in the computer science side of things, I get to be the storytelling, filmmaking side of things and get to do, do I have to stay up to date on technology? Yeah. Do I have to do it? No.
That's the bonus. That's the nice thing, Kelly. So what are some things that you're proud of that some of your students have gone on to do job-wise?
Well, so 20 years in, we've got a lot of people out in industry. And we're starting to get people really to sort of some of those upper echelons. I don't know if Boss Baby 2 is on Peacock right now, and the head of story on that was an illustration student that worked with us. His name's Andy Erickson. Love him. We have a guy named Emran Grover who came through our program, who's one of the top costume people at Pixar. Wow. And he was in charge of all the costumes for Coco. He did costumes for Luca.
No, wow.
He's spectacular. We had a ton of guys who worked at Weta in New Zealand, and so they worked on the Lord of the Rings films and the Hobbit films. They worked on a lot of these Planet of the Apes movies.
Yeah.
So I've got graduates at a lot of different places who've worked on amazing things. Not to mention, we have lots of people in animation, like animated features, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like the head of animation, for example, on Moana is Hiram Osmond, one of the Osmond grandchildren, right?
Wait. You're telling me Hiram Osmond is a Latter-day Saint?
Yeah, you think with that name? Yeah, so his dad is Verl, one of the deaf brothers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And Hiram came through our program. Awesome. He actually is responsible for Olaf, the character in Frozen.
Oh, no kidding.
And he modeled Olaf after one of his own children that was just this sweet, innocent, upbeat character. So Hiram's one of our guys. We've had a lot of people. That's the feature animation world. We've had a lot of people work in visual effects for live action. We've had a lot of people work in video games. We've got guys at Blizzard Games, guys at Riot. There's a studio in Salt Lake that was formerly part of Disney but is now part of Warner Brothers Games. We've had lots of people there. Some of the Epic Games, which is a huge game company, they do Fortnite.
Yeah.
The head creative is a BYU alum. And they're part of they started a company called Chair that is part of Epic, and they're just here in South Jordan. I've got guys and then we have all sorts of people a lot of people who work for the church, and we have people who work in marketing departments for, Fortune 500 companies, and people who do medical visualization and all sorts of stuff.
These are people that we don't know as much. Like actors, directors, you kind of know, but people who truly create, you don't know their names as much.
Right.
It's exciting to hear. And I don't remember, did Heather Walwork come through your program?
Her name is Heather Dixon in my world.
That's true.
It was
Heather
before
Dixon.
she was married. She just had her baby.
She just had a baby a couple days ago. Yeah.
Yep, she's spectacular.
So
Absolutely.
Heather has been on the show before.
Okay.
It reminded me when you said was part of Disney Interactive. She was a story artist. And actually, she, along with Bryce, is part of the Castle Collective, our Disneyland podcast. So I talk to Heather almost every week.
Yep,
so,
Heather. Love Heather.
One of the most talented artists. And in fact, she did, maybe we'll share it, she did an announcement when they were ready to announce that she was pregnant.
Yeah.
She did this animated announcement that just made me cry.
Yeah.
It was so awesome.
Yeah, no, she's lovely.
Yeah.
And then we have a bunch of guys that are just on the verge. Like one of my former students helped develop a retake on the Superman brand, which has been sold and is in production now for HBO Max. So he's one of the showrunners on that show.
Jeez.
We've got a lot of people just out doing really interesting things. A lot of people that are just right at that cusp of possibly directing or producing, or we're at that area. So a lot of good stuff has happened.
So when you go to a film and you sit down and one of your students who didn't know if they had the skills, whatever, you got to shape, mold, whatever. Now you're sitting down in a movie theater watching the work they've done. What level of satisfaction is that?
Yeah. I mean, it's evolved over time. It used to be jealousy, I have to be honest. When I would go out and visit them in the studios, or when I'd see their names in the credits, I was so jealous. I so wanted to be back there. But now, when I see what we've been able to make, and I'm so blessed because I'm just a cog in a machine that just happened, and clearly the Lord wanted it to happen because the resources and the funding really wasn't there, but great things came, and Adam Sidwell's group created a tradition that all the groups that followed either wanted to follow or wanted to one up, and so we've just created this culture of success. And it's spectacular. I feel so blessed. My kids don't feel as blessed, by the way. When we go to movies, they're the only kids sitting through the credits, right? Like, okay, we got to watch. Like, oh, I know that was one of our guys. That's one of our guys. That gal went through our program. But yeah, I mean,
they got to think that's so cool.
Well, they don't know what they have. My kids have had the studio tours at all the major studios, right?
Oh, man.
They've seen behind the curtain.
That's awesome.
So yeah, they've had some interesting, unique experiences.
All right, so if you've got parents who are sitting and listening right now, they know their kids can draw. I think sometimes for a parent, you're going, I don't know if pushing them toward their love of art is a good thing, because financially it could be challenging. Mm-hmm. But there is a whole true business side, and this is a business degree. This
Absolutely.
is a degree that prepares you to go out and work.
Yeah.
So give us the pitch as to why they should encourage their kids.
Well, so I don't pitch anybody, and I don't think you should encourage your kids. You should support them, definitely.
Got it.
I really think that kids need to, it's competitive.
Yeah.
And so they have to be passionate about it. And if you've pushed them down that road, they may not be passionate enough about it to want to sort of see it through. It's not like putting your kid in Chinese immersion like classes, right? Where like someday you're going to use this. They may not. The animation industry, the software we use is called Maya. There are 2,000 schools in the United States alone that teach that software.
Wow.
We are a tiny program. We only accept 25 students a year, but a lot of those programs, so we have 80 students total in our program. Some of these schools that we compete against have 1,000 students.
Sure.
Right? They're all competing for those same jobs. Now, our placement rate is high. We do really well. But are there jobs in the arts? Absolutely. And do we need arts? And do the arts uplift our community? And I don't just mean the LDS community, right? But our community, absolutely they do. But it comes from really passionate people who loved it enough to take that risk. Now, my graduates make good money and are able to support their families, which isn't true of all people in the arts.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
BYU has a huge music department. And a lot of kids majoring in music. And percentage-wise, that it's maybe 2-3% of the kids who graduate in music actually end up working in it. Whereas, I'm like at 85%, 90% of my graduates will work in this field. But you have to be passionate about the arts to go after it. But then are there opportunities? Absolutely, there are opportunities. I just went to lunch with a graduate actually 2 days ago, and he just finished an internship and got a job, and he's making $90,000 a year. Awesome. Now, that's a great rate, I have to admit. That's a pretty good rate. Not everybody's going to make that sort of rate. But can you support a family on that? Absolutely, you can, right? So we're in a unique position in that regard, and maybe that's why the program has blossomed, because it does have the ability to support families. I
just love that you have legacy. Yeah. You're going to have legacy. Your work has now gone out throughout the world, and I just think there couldn't be a bigger blessing than that.
Yeah, yes. And the blessing to me is, and this never made sense to me, and I'll share something, and you have to kind of be careful what you share with people, but we all know about patriarchal blessings.
Yep.
And I told you my grandfather was my patriarch, and he gave me a blessing, and in my blessing it says, "Now, Kelly, as your grandfather, I want you to know that Heavenly Father is proud of you, and that you've been blessed with many talents that very few have been blessed with, but that those talents aren't for your own benefit, but for the benefit of others." And that never made any sense to me. When I moved to LA and I was struggling and I wasn't having success, I kept trying to figure out what. I went to school on a scholarship. I made all these things happen for myself. Why is this not happening? And it didn't even hit me until I had been teaching for 10 years, and I went back and read my patriarchal blessing. And then I was like, shoot. Basically what he was saying was the Lord gave me these talents so I could be helpful to other people. And I'm a selfish person. I didn't like that answer.
Yeah.
But I am. I'm so blessed that is my legacy.
It's awesome.
And the impact is huge.
It's a beautiful legacy. And like I said, when I reached out to Adam and told him you were coming on, he just lit up. And I'm sure I'll drop Heather a quick text to let her know we were hanging out. And I know she'll be thrilled. And like I said, we have a lot of mutual friends who think very highly of you. We're going to wrap up the episode with the question that we ask all of our guests. And that is, Kelly, what does being a member of the church mean to you?
I want to say structure, but not in a way that sounds formal. It's given my life direction. We talked about legacy. So much of my life is about the church. And as I raise my kids and they struggle with their own testimonies, it can be challenging because so much of my life is about the church. Without the church, I don't know what I would have. And I love art and I love animation and I love film, but I love it in light of looking at it through the lens of the gospel. So I don't know. When you ask me what role does the church play or what is the church? The church is my life.
Awesome. He is a filmmaker, he is an animator, and he has a great legacy teaching all these amazing students over at BYU. Kelly Loosely, thank you for sharing your Latter-day Life with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And my special thanks to my guest and new friend, Kelly Loosely. I just love Kelly. And going back and listening to this, to prepare this episode, I was just reminded of how much I enjoyed sitting with him. He is a great guy. And Kelly, thank you so much for all of your good work. This week in my Latter-day Life was an interesting week. I actually traveled out to see a customer. For the first time, since the pandemic, I've been going to our office in San Diego fairly regularly, and I've gone to one sort of trade show event, but I have not gone to see a customer to do a presentation. Everything has been Zoom. Well, this past week, I got to go out to Walmart, and Walmart has been a partner of ours on and off for a few years. I've been out there many times to see them. And this buyer wanted to meet with us. And what a great opportunity. Walmart is in Bentonville, Arkansas, one of the most beautiful places. I love Bentonville. And as I was preparing to fly out, literally I had flown to San Diego for a couple days and then was flying from San Diego out to Arkansas, suddenly I remembered Garth Smith, and if you don't know Garth Smith, you should. You can look him up pretty much anywhere, like on iTunes or Apple Music or Amazon Music or Spotify, wherever. He's such an amazing artist. You can also go way back in our archives. You know, we interviewed him. He's just the most talented pianist and an incredible guy. And I remember that Garth had moved from San Diego out to Bentonville. So while we were taking off, I dropped him a quick text and said, "Hey man, I'm going to be out in Arkansas. Love to come by and say hi if I can." And he sent me back a text, super excited, and it was just great. And so sure enough, I went to my meetings. By the way, let me just tell you, Bentonville, Arkansas, this was not the week to be there. It was 95 degrees. And according to my weather app, they give you the real feel. What does it really feel like? Apparently, it really feels like 107 in Bentonville. That humidity is amazing. But when I got done with my meetings, I went out to see Garth. And Garth and I had texted back and forth a little bit. He was hoping that maybe we could go get dinner or something, but my schedule was too tight. But I at least wanted to see him, see his new house. And so I ran down there, and what a gorgeous home they have. Oh, it's just beautiful. And it overlooks this incredible grove of trees. It is one of the most beautiful views out on his back deck. And his family was there. And when I saw Garth, we just gave each other the biggest hug. And I just felt like I was there with a brother. And I need to give a little bit of backstory on Garth, because if you were to watch me and Garth together, you would say, "Holy cow, how long have you guys been friends? And you must have been together hundreds of times." Well, Garth and I first met, close to 4 years ago when we started the show. It wasn't that long into the show. So, but otherwise, we met in his home when we first recorded, and otherwise we've just stayed in touch. We don't get together. We don't go out. But he feels like a brother to me. I love Garth. I love him so much, and his family is so wonderful. And as we were talking, we were kind of talking just about life and about their move and about business and just kind of general, what friends talk about. And as I was getting ready to leave and I had to drive out to Tulsa, Oklahoma, we started talking about sort of why we have this bond. And the bond that we have is in the gospel. See, Garth has devoted his life and his talents in playing music to building the kingdom. And it's why I look up to him and admire him so much, and I'm so grateful to call him a friend. And he said the same thing about me. And what's funny is I definitely don't have any of his talents whatsoever. We've talked at length now. I have no musical talents, but he found his talent in piano. And he uses it to spread the word and build the kingdom and enrich so many lives. And he had mentioned how much he just loves that I use the podcast to build the kingdom. And that's really, I have close friends who I see all the time that I don't feel that kinship and that bond that I feel with Garth and so many of our other guests. Funny enough, when I was in the airport, I saw Gaina Lynn Condi, who Gaina Lynn's been on the show now a couple times. She said that she had thought of me that morning, because she'd like to come back on the show yet again and do a catching up episode. This is what happens with past guests when we share the gospel, when we share those common bonds, and when we literally share our testimonies with each other, and when we work together. Think about how many people you've served with in church capacities, that you have that bond from having done a girls' camp or a youth conference, or served in a Relief Society presidency or a bishopric. Those bonds are so deep and so strong, and I'm so grateful for Garth. I'm grateful that in all corners of the world, I have true brothers and sisters who I love, and I just have that incredible relationship. What a blessing it was this past week. I'll look forward to seeing Garth when it's about 20 degrees cooler and a little bit less humid, but so grateful to have a friend in Arkansas. And that's what's happening this week in my Latter-day Life. The Latter-day Lives podcast is produced by Gene Chittister, social media by Skylar Fleming. I've been your host, Sean Rapier. I think that's about all we got for you this week. So until we meet again, there is a great, big, beautiful world out there. Go be in it, just not of it. Thanks for listening.